So Death Side of the Moon is yesterday, and I want to talk about it a little bit and reflect on it while it's still fresh on my mind. Something that happens for me a lot with my work, with energy work, and Death Side of the Moon, and other kinds of things that I'm doing, is that there's such a kind of specific deep energy that I go into when I do it, and then when I try to talk about it from a place outside of that, it can often be very difficult for me to find ways to describe it. So I'm going to try to sort of, since it still feels very fresh for me from yesterday, I'm going to try to ride that wave a little bit and talk about Death Side of the Moon and what it is and how it went and anything I'm thinking about it. Because with Death Side of the Moon, I find this with my energy work too, but maybe especially with this event, I find it hard to translate to people what I'm talking about. And I feel the urge to just be like, just try it and you'll get it, you know, like step into the experience, the mystery of it, and you'll see. But I really do want to find ways to make it more legible to people who are curious about it. So what is Death Side of the Moon? Death Side of the Moon is an event that I've put together to help give people a framework for going through big changes in their lives, basically. And I really like the frame of death and calling it death cycles, because for me personally that has been really a glue, kind of gluing all of these really disparate experiences together, with this kind of one similar signature to them that to me feels very deathy, and so I use that frame. I know that there are other ways of describing it that make more sense to people, just talking about change, talking about surrender, talking about initiation, talking about shadow work. So all of those things feel relevant and like they apply, but yeah, I'll use the words death, inner death, energetic death, life cycles a lot, because for me personally that's the most resonant, most powerful language for it. And I'm hardly the first to use it. Obviously, lots of people talk about death and rebirth cycles. So I feel like I have gone through an enormous number of these. I mean, throughout my life, but especially in the last 5 years. And I feel like I have been taken through by life so many different experiences, kind of wearing different masks. I'm dressed up in different ways, but as I said before, all with the same underlying theme and signature of death, of letting go, of going in a new direction, making a big change in my life. And not always big, I mean small ones too. That's the thing about these cycles, is it's kind of fractally, and so it's moment to moment, letting go of one moment and embracing the next. You know, it's present in that too. So it shows up in small ways for me all the time too. So what I've done is I've basically mapped all of that out and put it all in one place, everything that I've learned from going through so many of these in the last 5 years. And there have been big external ones, like leaving a software engineering job and going to massage school, and then putting my hands-on bodywork practice on hold and going into remote energy work. Those are two examples of big changes. My grandmother died last year. It's the first person really, really close to me in a while who has passed. So there are examples like that, and then there are a lot that I've been through that have been more internal, and people from the outside might not understand it as the same kind of loss or transition, but for me it feels just as potent and new, just as big of a transition. And I find that it has sort of some of those same markers and the same map as going through a big external change in life. So I've poured a lot of myself into mapping the parts of this cycle, and the commonalities that I find each time I go through one, and things that have been really helpful for me, even poetry that I've written about it, yeah, I put in a bunch of exercises this time around. I totally changed Death Side of the Moon from the ones that I ran last year, and I have a bunch of exercises in there so that the people attending can be really engaged and participating, and it's not just me talking at them. And it's only 3 of us total, so it's nice and small and intimate, and there's lots of opportunity to talk and share. So this time I included like a bunch of these tiny little micro poems, I call them, about micro deaths that I've gone through, and invited the people in attendance to write some of their own. And then something that I think is extra cool about this event is that that's the first half. The first half is me teaching about it and us doing these exercises and reflecting on like death cycles that we've gone through, death cycles that we're in. I'm also asking the participants to reflect on their relationships with death and what they can learn from that, and reflecting on death cycles that they're in, and transitions that they're going through, and ways that life is asking them to go in a new direction. And then we do energy work for the second half. That's what the second half is. So there's 2 people plus me, and so one by one I do about 20 minutes of energy work for each person. I can't really like think of other stuff I've been to, other kinds of events where you get to do both like that. You get this conceptual framework first, and it's I don't even feel like it's that conceptual. To me, it's like a very energetic framework. It's so built on the energy of my experience and people that my experiences and people that I've supported, that it doesn't feel that conceptual, but I mean, I am delivering it via words and concepts. So there's the first half is that kind of conceptual framework and why engage with death, and then here's the maps I've been making and talking about all of it, and then going into an energy work portion where we actually get to feel into what surrender means in a non-conceptual, embodied way, because that's a huge part of it. It's not just like making big changes in life is not just deciding like, okay, I'm gonna make this change, okay, I'm gonna surrender to this. Like, it is such a full-bodied process, and I think that actually takes a lot of like practice to know how to do that and not get completely thrown off by the physical, energetic, embodied challenge of the surrender process, of the process of change, of the process of letting go of parts of ourselves and going in new directions. So I think it's super fucking cool that I made this event where you get to come talk about it, learn about it conversationally and conceptually, and then also really explore like, okay, well, maybe I have an idea of this new direction I want to go, this change I want to make. Like, what does the actual embodied, energetic, non-conceptual version of this surrender look like? And so 20 minutes of energy work is not that much. It's basically like getting a little bit of a taste, but I have found it to be really powerful so far in terms of what comes up in that time. I mean, the first time I ran it, I was like, I had my doubts. I was skeptical about like, what is it? I didn't know if it would work to like schedule an inner death experience, schedule a surrender, you know, because in my experience with these things, like the timing it's on its own timing, and you can't decide to make things like, yeah, there's such a mystery around the way that the timing of these things works out that I wondered, like, okay, if we say we're going to do energy work for this kind of surrender or internal death process, is that going to be forced? And I have been really pleasantly surprised with how it's been going. I would say my sense now from having run it, I guess I've probably done like 5 energy portions of Death Side of the Moon, like given energy work to 5 people during Death Side of the Moon. I would say that like my perception of it now is that, oh, like I think we all have so much, it's like probably so many of us have a queue of like stuff to let go of, embodied surrender that's waiting to happen, that it feels like by creating this intentional container for it and going into it in a supported, intentional way, like there's going to be plenty there to work with. So it has not, in my experience, felt forced at all so far. So I just like laid in bed last night. I ran it yesterday, Death Side of the Moon. I just laid in bed last night and I just like couldn't fall asleep for a while, and I just lay there and like my heart just felt like it was glowing. Like, that probably sounds kind of cheesy or something, but it's a really new feeling for me to put this much of myself into, and like I have slides for it. I have an external art project of it now that I can point to. It's something that I made. It's something outside of me. It feels like I made art out of the last 5 years of my life, and that art is Death Side of the Moon, and it feels really good. It feels like if I died today, a big part of me would live in this project that I made. Yeah, I've never quite had that feeling to that same extent. I mean, I've done a lot of art in my life that I absolutely love, and I've done a lot of cool work projects. I've done, like, my podcast is definitely that way, but I've never quite put myself into something to the extent that I have in this. I mean, there are people that have taught me a lot about these death cycles, about surrender, about shadow work, about letting go, both kind of on the more conceptual side, the more pragmatic side, and then on the more embodied side. But a ton of this is stuff that I have just muddled through and figured out on my own. And I think, like, yeah, it's been such an intense, big, important part of my life, my entire life. But like I said, like the last 5 years, the getting to actually teach about it and put it into something, put it into an art project feels so good. So good. Is there anything else that I want to say about it? Yeah, Narinder Bazin, who's been something of like a death midwife mentor to me off and on, she said something to me one time about how, like, when people get interested in death doula work, like, people come to death work often thinking, I'm gonna be a death doula, I'm gonna sit visual with people who are dying, and then they find, once they start exploring, that actually, like, the death work has a very different plan for them. Like, there is a calling there, and there's a reason that they show up to it, and then it takes them in an unexpected direction. And that's very much been the case for me with my death work. I mean, I also want to do, I've sat with a bunch of people in hospice. I do want to do death doula work, sitting bedside with people, but there's been a very clear pull for me in this direction of basically exploring the overlap of what I've been doing, healing work, body work, energy work, and end-of-life care, and finding this really beautiful intersection that's like shepherding people through internal deaths, energetic deaths, and that's what Death Side of the Moon is all about, because I've gone through a lot of these by myself. I've also been supported through some, and I would love to live in a society where people in general have a lot more support going through these kinds of things, and it's the kind of thing where, like, you really have to have gone there in yourself to hold space for it in other people. And so yeah, one reason I love hosting this event is that I get to, it's a bit like sitting bedside with somebody, except it's over Zoom, and it's not literal end of life sitting bedside. It's sitting bedside for them to go through, sitting virtual bedside for them to go through an internal death and rebirth. Thanks for watching. Reach out if you have any questions about Death Side of the Moon. It's fucking awesome.